welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I've got a new pattern for you and it's the number one in a series of some exciting new little animal dolls that I'm making up for you all. The first one is obviously this very sweet little bunny. Now she's made up in fabrics and felt, and you can see that she has little movable arms, little floppy legs, but she doesn't have any special hardware at all. So very simple to make up. Of course there's a free pattern. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below, download your free pattern templates, and then I'm going to take you through it every single step of the way. Let's get sewing. So we're going to start with the body of this little doll today. Now all of my little animal dolls have the same body pattern. They're all made up in the same way. So we start off with, I'm using quilting cotton fabric for this little doll, and I just find that if you interface with a fusible woven interfacing, which I always do with all of my dolls, you get a nice weighted fabric which gives us a little doll who has some strength. Her shape is held really well and actually makes it quite easy to sew up, and also means that she can handle lots of loving and lots of adventures with their little owner. So first of all you need your two torso pieces. So two torso pieces which are interfaced and your two leg pieces. You've also got your little arms and you need 4 of those. 2 are reversed, and you can see that mine are interfaced. Now on the little arms I actually use a set of forceps for turning these little arms, turning them the right way out once they're sewn. If you don't have any specialty turning tools or forceps or anything like that, perhaps don't interface the little arm sections. It just will make it a little bit easier to turn those through because they are quite fine, and they can be a bit tricky to turn through. So moving on, the fabrics that I've chosen, we do sew in this way because this little doll is going to have a little skirt and a little neck ruffle, which I'm going to show you how to make. We choose the fabrics this way. We choose a fabric for the little bottom leg section and the arms, and it's the same fabric for both. And then we choose a fabric for the torso, which will also be what you want for the little dress. So for the little skirt and the little neck ruffle. That way when our doll is all put together, we have this look of a little dress without too much work. So once you've got that and your fabrics are chosen, I've pinned these together and cut them out. So all I've done is just taken out the bottom and top pins here, just so that I don't have to open them all the way out. And the first thing that we do is to sew the top front to the top bottom across, straight across here. Now I always sew my little dolls twice, so one line of stitching right over the top of the other, and that's just for strength. My stitch length is around about a 2, and my seam allowance throughout this little body is only quite tiny. It's only around about 4 millimeters. So stitch that one twice on the machine, and then the same with the front to the back. You can of course unpin all of this and do them as separate pieces. I just find it's easier because they're already pinned, and then I will sew that one across twice also. Now that I have stitched those 2 seams, we have a 4 pattern piece, you can see there, of the whole body, front and back, and I've also given that a little press. So from here, the next thing we do is to sew up the full body all the way around. Now this little doll has little inset arms for absolute strength of that arm being connected. I can show you there on the little bunny here. You can see that our arms are actually sewn into like a little box seam like you would on the bottom of a bag, but they're very, very strong. They are put in after we have sewn up the rest of the doll. So the stitch that we're going to do, the seam we're going to sew, we're going to match up these 2 little side seams now, and we're going to sew from the top of the neck, just this little section here, and then we're going to leave this little square section open, and we're going to sew all of the way around up until this side, leave our little square section open, and just sew that little neck section there. Again, I sew that seam twice, and it is the same seam allowance as this one. You can see now that my whole body pieces are sewn together. See there, the little neck section. I've left that little square open and have gone all the way around the body and done the same on the other side. So what I do now, even though it's a very tiny seam, because we want really nice rounded finishes to our little doll on the little arms and legs, and also in this little crotch area, if you have pinking shears, this is one of the tools that I would suggest. I don't suggest unnecessary tools to you, but a very good pair of pinking shears is marvellous for making little 3D dolls and so on, because it's just a really quick way to notch your seams. So just for example, on your very obvious curves, we just go around, and I'm going to actually go around the whole doll. The straight sections don't matter so much, but definitely up through these curves, and we'll do the same on the arms. It just gives you a lovely rounded finish and makes it easier to turn through. You can see that I've just notched those little curve areas. Now of course, if you don't have pinking shears, just use your little tiny scissors and snip little notches into those seams, just so we just get a lovely curve. So the next stage is, here's where our little arms are going to be inserted. So we're going to make a little box corner. First of all, just pop your fingers inside the little neck there, and we just flatten out that seam on the top of the shoulder. It's just like a little finger press, and we do the same with the little one leading up here. And then you'll see that what we're going to do is pull the sides out to match up those seams. I hope you can see that. Match up those two seams there. And I'm going to just use one of my little clips, which are very, very useful for this. And we're just going to clip those two seams together. We're not ready to put our little arms in yet because we haven't made them. But I find that if I do that on both sides and I let it sit there while I'm getting my little arms ready, then when I go to pop them into that seam, they're nice and flattened out. So I do that with both sides. And then we move on to getting our little arms ready. You can see those little seams met up and a straight line across there. That's how we're going to sew them across. So we can just pop that one aside, and then we move on to our little arms. So as you can see, I've already made up a little arm. So I'm going to be demonstrating on this one just for the sake of time. So I generally just use my little clips in a couple of places, and I make sure that particularly those ends are nicely met up. And then it's simply a matter of sewing. We leave the top open and we just sew that same little 3 to 4 millimeter seam allowance all of the way around 2 times, and then we just turn that one through. I also, after I've sewn that one, I use my pinking shears again on those curves. Again, just use your little tiny scissors and notch those edges if you don't have those. I'm going to be using, this is what I was talking about before, I'm going to be using my hemostats forceps, some people call them, to turn that piece through. If you don't have those, it can be a bit tricky. So like I said earlier, perhaps don't interface your little arm pieces, then it's a bit easier to turn. So I'm going to sew that up on the machine now. You can see I've sewn up that little arm now, and I have also used my pinking shears again all the way around just to make that curve turn out very easily. Now is where I can show you where these little forceps come in very, very handy, and they're not just handy for turning. So obviously I can lock the end there, and I can give my little arm a little wiggle. Just to ease it over that top part, and you can see that it will just push all the way through. Unlock my forceps, and then that little arm is turned through. So you can see that is quite a narrow little arm. Perhaps you haven't put interfacing on yours if you don't have forceps. You can see it's quite easy though if you do have these. Now these are probably the most used tool in my toolbox. I have them in a couple of sizes for stuffing and turning longer sections. If you're going to be making little dolls and and cloth animals and so on, they really are a tool I would recommend that you get for your toolkit, and they're available at most big craft and sewing outlets now because they're very widely used for exactly this. So now that it's turned through, we just roll out those seams just between fingers and thumbs, just so we've got a lovely curve. And you can see, because we've clipped those curves, we have got a lovely little curved arm there. So roll those all out, and then we stuff that little arm. And again, I'm using my little forceps. You can see how much easier it is because that is a little tiny opening. And we start with little pieces. If you don't have forceps, you can just use perhaps a knitting needle or chopsticks. This just makes the job really easy, and you can find that you really can pack it in. So you can't feel that, but you can see that it's very firm, and that'll hold its shape hopefully for years and years. So with lots of hand holding from littlies. So we really pack that first one in. We want that really, really tight. And we keep adding, and just little pieces. Try and put a big piece in there and you'll end up with lumps, and we want a nice smooth little arm. And you just work your way down, and we're going to fill that little arm right up until around about probably 1.5 centimetres from the top. The reason for that is we want a little bit of room for when we sew that little arm into that little box corner, that the arm just has a nice natural fall to it. We want that when we pick up little Bunny, that she's lovely and soft and yielding. And if you stuff right up tight to the edge, of course, you'll end up with this effect. And that's really not what we're after. So fill right up to about 1.5 centimetres from the top. Now I have both little arms filled, and you can see that I've just stitched across the top just to close that opening. It just makes it easier for us to manage, and you can see that they're quite firm. So now we come to popping them in. Now at this point, our little body doesn't have a front or a back because they're both exactly the same. But what we do have to do is make sure that our little arms are put in and both going in the same direction, and that will then be our front. So as I showed you before, we've had our little body sitting there with our little clips on. So that's nicely flattened out and ready for us to pop that in. So we're going to pop that little arm inside the neck area, and you're going to find that it's just going to fit, and it can take a bit of wiggling. And we want to pop it between those two layers. Now here's where your forceps can come in handy too, because you can reach in there and grab the end of your little arm and pull him through. And all we want is that little arm gets sewn straight into that little seam. And it seems a little fiddly, but I have worked on this pattern for a long time to work out the easiest way for you to add arms, because often we use a button joint and just stitching arms on. And I sent one of these little bunnies to my granddaughter to try and test it for loving, and she is 6 years old, and the first little bunny was button jointed on the arms, and she loved the little arms right off. So I thought, well, that's not going to work. So I have worked out this, and this works really well. This is a forever arm. This is never coming out. So you can see that that little arm actually fits exactly across that little space. Just make sure it's all beautifully lined up and that your edges are definitely in there. Your arm is definitely secure. And then we're going to take that back to the machine and just stitch across that seam, straight across that shoulder. We're going to go, I generally sew across 4 times, just to make absolutely sure. And there we go. That little arm is securely sewn in to that little box corner. You can see there. And so we're just going to repeat with the second arm. But we're going to make absolutely sure that as we put that little arm in, that our little hand is curving to the front. the same direction as the other one. So that one is just going to be popped in. You see that both arms are pointing towards the front. If we turned it this way, then she would be going backwards with one of the arms. So we're going to just repeat exactly the same thing with this little arm into that shoulder. So now we have both arms in those little shoulder box corners, and both of the little arms are facing the same way. Now I've taken my little forceps again, and I've already tucked one of the little legs up. I'm going to do the same with the other one. Again, these little legs are a little bit thicker than the arms, so you won't find those too hard to turn through with the interfacing on. Pop that one all the way up. You can see why it's easier with forceps. And then we're going to just reach in and find those. The little arms will turn through. I'll try and find the little legs. They're in there somewhere. And we can pull the whole thing through. These parts are always a little fiddly. They're fiddly for everyone, I can assure you. And we just very carefully turn that little body all the way through. You can see we have beautiful little box corner shoulders. And that, my friends, is the safest, strongest way to sew in a little arm and still keep all that lovely flexibility. So while it seems a little bit fiddly, trust me, of all of the methods, this one's probably the easiest. And you also never have to worry about those little arms falling off, which is a bit of a horror story. So now I just take my knitting needle, and because I've notched all those curves with my pinking shears, or perhaps you've done it just with your little scissors, I'm able to push those little curves out. We've got lovely rounded edges there. Just going to go through the whole body and push out all of the seams. I then go around, as I always do, and roll those seams out. I know that we're going to be filling it and that's going to push them out, but I just find this helps with the stuffing, and it helps keep the stuffing nice and even too. Now I'm going to do that all the way around, and I actually give that section just a light press, but I do use a protective cloth. Just give it a light press because we're going to put some little markings in to see where our legs will fold. I've given this little one a little press, you can see, so this section is nice and flat. The reason for that is we're going to mark in our little leg bends. We need to sew a little seam across there. In your pattern pieces that you will have downloaded, I've made you a little leg bend guide. Okay, and you don't cut that out of a piece of material. Cut it in a little, I like to put it on a little piece of lightweight cardboard, and you can see that we're just going to pop that one on there, right on that inner crotch seam, and you can line it up across the top. And of course you've done lovely straight sewing across your torso there, and you can see, make sure that it's all lined up and it's all the same either side, and you can draw in your two lines. I just thought that would make it easier for you all, and I'm quite a perfectionist in that way. I want it to be exactly the same on both sides, so that's probably more for me than you. So when I like to use just a little wax coloured pencil that's just a little bit deeper than the shade of the fabric, those two little seams we're going to sew in on the machine. Again, I'm going to sew them twice. We're not going to do that now. We're first going to fill the legs, but the reason why we have drawn them on now is because we still have everything nice and flat, and we get a nice accurate marking. So I'm going to pop that one aside, and now we're just going to fill those little legs. And again, I'm going to be using my forceps, and we're going to fill the little legs in exactly the same way that we did the little arms, just with little pieces, really pack them really, really firm. Again, you can see with the little bunny here, her legs are really, really firm there. And we're going to do that all the way up to the top. And just as we did with the little arms, where we left probably about 1.5 centimetres where we kept it quite nice and soft, that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to fill to about here, nice and firm, leave about 1.5 centimetres because we're going to be popping that one under the machine, and we want that when that seam is sewn that they're still nice and flexible, so she can sit down and she's not all stiff. Also, now that you can see that the body's put together like that, this section of the video is going to be used for all of my animal dolls. So perhaps you're making My Little Fox, perhaps you're making a little boy, and if you're making My Little Teddy Bear doll, obviously perhaps he won't be wearing a dress. There will be lots and lots of videos for you to make different clothing for them. So you can see that you piece your body and your legs to suit. If you were making a little bear, because there will be a little bear in the series, your little bear you might choose to dress him in overalls, and you would choose this fabric print to suit being a little undershirt. So you can see that you can mix and match them any way you like, but this section of the video is going to be used for all of my little doll videos because the body is constructed the same way every time. So don't be concerned if you see that the fabrics change throughout the video. Okay, so now we're just going to fill those little legs, both sides. I have both of those little legs filled nice and firm now. You can see here that along that little line that we've already drawn, I've just popped a pin in to line up exactly with that line, because now we're going to take this little doll to the machine and we're going to stitch twice straight over the top of each other to make that little leg bend. So you can see there, because I've left enough room without stuffing, I'm able to make that nice and flat, which also means it will be easy to pop it under the machine. I just use a thread that's quite matching, so it'll be quite hidden. The thread, that seam is hidden in the leg bend anyway. So just 2 rows of stitching right on top of each other will secure those legs. So our little leg seams are done, so we've got a nice little bend there with those legs. So now next we just continue to fill this little body. Now I've taken Bunny's skirt off here so that you can see how we pack that body nice and firm. It really is quite solid all the way to the top. When you're filling, make sure that you're filling out this whole shoulder section here so that it holds out our little arms nicely. So just as firm as you can manage. Again, I'm going to be using my little forceps, my larger forceps this time, and popping my stuffing in. Make sure that you get down into all of those little corners. Take your time. If you use smaller pieces, you'll be able to get those little corners filled, and then you can increase the size of your pieces. You'll be surprised how much these little animal dolls can eat with the polyester filling. But just keep going, because we do need a nice firm packed body. It's just the doll has a longer life and holds its shape beautifully over the years. So I'm going to keep on going until I'm filled right up to the top here, and then I'm going to show you a little trick at the top to help you with filling out those shoulders. So now I've got that little body filled right up to the top and right up the neck there, you see. Now it's extremely important that this section here, the shoulders here, and this whole neck section is really firm. The reason for that is, of course, the doll looks better, but also because we're going to be sewing on our little head, and the more firm this is, the easier it is for you to sew that head on. There's nothing worse than trying to sew body parts of little dolls together when they're softly filled. It's just really difficult, and in fact, when they're stuffed very firm, it's actually very, very easy. So there's a little trick. Here's when the secret tips come out. Because I've spent years doing this and filling little bodies, I'm always after an easier way to do it, a better way to do it to get. Now you find that polyester filling, you've probably already discovered, it wants to pop out back at you all the time, especially when you're filling something like this, it wants to escape back out. Here's where the little trick comes in. This is a felting needle. It's a wool felting needle. It's for doing felting, little felted animals and figures and all that sort of thing. What it does is that it compacts fibres. Generally, it's used for compacting wool fibres, but I've found, just by accident, that of course we can use it to pack our little poly fibres, which means with very little effort, you can see there, mind your fingers though, because these have razor sharp little barbs, we're going to be able to pack that polyester filling in. Initially you feel like you're not getting anywhere, and after a while you'll see that all of those little fibres are lining up and it is packing down really nicely. What that means is that we can pack it down. We can also pack it into that shoulder. We can flip it around and we can pack directly into that shoulder, and it means that the filling won't move. It'll stay where we put it. It's a really, really great tip for even when you're filling little dolls' arms and little animals where you've got to ladder stitch the opening closed and all the stuffing's coming out at you. This is just absolutely the best tip. So they're very inexpensive. You can buy a little set of them. Because I'm using it, these come in very fine little things too if you're doing very fine work. This is probably one of the bigger ones. So it needs to be quite big because we're just looking to pack that down. So you can see there that now that's quite solid. Now what I can do now, of course, is I can pack that down further, and because I like this really firm, I can add some more, and that stuffing that I just packed in, it's not going to shift. So I'm sort of not wasting my time going over the same thing. Now that I've popped that one in, I'm going to continue to pack that down until I've got it really nice and even. Now we really do want this little body filled right up to the top. You see how I've got my filling is right up to there, and you might think, how are we going to close that? But trust me, it will close. We're going to put a drawstring around that and pull it in. So as firm as we can have that, and the flatter we have it, the better. So you can see I'm making it a nice, flat, packed joint there. Now you can see just how firm I've managed to pack that little torso there with the use of my needle. They're going to be your best friend, these little felting needles, and you can find them anywhere. Most of your large sewing and craft outlets will have felting needles now. It's quite a popular craft, or you can just purchase them online. Just make sure that you get one that's a fairly a heavyweight size, and it's really the most useful tool. So now that we have it's nicely packed, it's nice and even, we're going to close up that neck opening. And the way that we do that, I'm using a Gutermann. I'm using a top stitching thread, which is an upholstery thread. I have it doubled. I'm using just a slim darning needle, which is quite a strong needle. I'm going to start at the back, and we're going to just sew a running stitch all the way around that little neck edge, only probably around about 4 millimeters in from the edge. I'm going to leave a tail hanging. We don't need a knot because we're going to be tying off. I'm going to go all the way around that little neck edge. So I've sewn all the way around, come back to the start there, a little way from each other, and you can see that I can pull those threads up. I'm actually going to knot those two ends. I'm leaving my needle on for now because I'm going to go around again. So this is where you need 4 hands, but just get that tied off as tight as you can. I've just knotted those off, and because I still have my needle, I'm actually going to go around one more time and I'm going to tie off again. So I've just knotted off that second time, gone around, knotted off the second time, just so that it's really, really secure. Our little head is going to be sewn on top of that, and now we have the perfect little petite, lovely firm. See all of the mobility, super strong, ready to add our animal's head. Now, for the next part of the video, you'll be going on to make whichever animal, whichever doll it is. This section of the video you'll see each time. So we'll move on from here and we'll start making the head. So we're ready to make up our little bunny's head now, and these are the pieces that you'll need. Now I make up the little bunny's head, and most of my little animal dolls, I make up their heads in a felt. I used a washable acrylic felt. just because it's a little bit stronger. Pure wool felt is beautiful, but it tends to be very, very soft. Now I interface my felt with the same fusible woven interfacing that I've used on the body, and the reason for that is it makes it strong, it makes it hold its shape, and of course you can sew it and you're not worried about those seams coming apart. Now the pattern pieces that you will need, I've already sewn up one of the ears just to save a bit of time, so you can see that you'll need 2 inner ear pieces and 2 outer ear pieces, and they are all interfaced. You will also need your back headpiece and also your 2 front head pieces, which will be sewn together like that. You'll need something for your eyes. Now the choice is yours. I'm actually going to use safety eyes on this little bunny. This little bunny here, I used glass eyes, which I put in after the doll is all put together and pop the eyes in and tie them off from behind. This time I'm going to use the safety eyes because in most cases for very young children, we'd rather they had safety eyes and couldn't pull them out. The difference is slight. With safety eyes, you don't quite get the same pull in that you get with a glass eye because you can't pull it in as much. They're applied before we stuff the head, but we still get a nice little effect, and I'll show you a trick to make them look a little more sunken than others. So if you're using safety eyes, we need 2 of those obviously, and the 2 little backing, and we just need some embroidery thread, or I've used a pearl thread there for the nose and mouth. All these features are done after we have actually sewn all the head up. So let's start with making up the second little ear. You see that one is already done. So it's just right sides together, and we leave that top section open, and we're going to sew the same little seam allowance, about 3 to 4 millimeter, all the way around, leaving that top edge open. And I do sew this section twice, just because when I'm getting my knitting needle and I'm pulling it through and turning that top edge out, I want that to be very strong. So now that that one's all sewn up, I've also just used my pinking shears again, and I have just notched those little curves. Just going to turn this one through, and I'm using my forceps again to do that. Just makes the job just that little bit easier. And then I'll use my knitting needle to push those edges right out. The same way that I always do, that I push them all out, and then I will roll those seams out between thumb and fingers. And I actually like to press these little ears before I put them actually into the head. So I give that a little press, and when I'm doing that, I'm actually going to press that ear, and then I'm going to fold the sides in, either side, just to meet in the middle. Make sure it's nicely centered. I give that one a little press, and then I'm just going to take it to the machine, and just across the edge there, I'm just going to secure that with a little stitch on the machine, just so that it holds together. Makes it easier for when we're popping it into the head. There we have our second little ear. So they're all ready to go. Our next step is to sew together the front center seam of our little bunny's head. I like to use my clips. You can use pins, of course. And just make sure, it's very, very important that those edges are lined up. This seam is again sewn twice. And we're just going to sew just that front edge there. Now that little seam is sewn, and I have used my pinking shears again on that curve. When you're sewing that front seam, make sure that you do keep your stitching nice and even, a nice regular curve there, because the better that you sew that seam, of course, the nicer that little front of that little bunny's face is. And we just turn that one through just to push that seam out. It's very important that their seams are rolled out, because we want that lovely little round nose line. You can see that's got a lovely smooth edge. Now the next step is that we're going to pop our ears, and we're going to stitch them on to this front of the head first, and then they will be caught up in the seam when we add the back of the head. I find it easier to stitch them on quickly first, just this side of the seam line. You can see that on your pattern pieces you had little marks for the ears. It's very, very important that you line them up, and so that the ears are going at a space exactly the same across the top of the head, because you don't want one sitting right over here and one over here. So all these little marks that we put on patterns are all very important. So you can see there that I've lined up the edge there with that little mark, and that's exactly where I'm going to be stitching that one on. So I'm just going to clip that one for now. You'll also notice the way that I have put that little ear on, of course, is when that little head is turned through, as we turn it through, that little ear will flip up, and that is the front of the head. If I were to put it on like this, when we turn that little head through, of course his ear would be going backwards. So you must make sure that your contrasting fabric side is facing down, just like that. So I'm just going to stitch those on. Now both those little ears are they're just sewn on just there, and you can see that that's how they will look when they're turned up, and I can see that they are the same distance from that centre seam as each other. Fold them down inwards like that. Finger press that little seam open there. You'll find the little mark that marks the centre back of your head is there, and that is the one that you want to remember that it's right sides together. You want to match that centre mark with that centre seam. That's your first point. You can use clips or pins, whatever you feel comfortable with, and all we're going to do is pin that little back head to the side head piece, and you can see there that it fits beautifully, and we just pin or clip that one all the way around. And once you've done that, it's just a matter of sewing that seam right the way around. Now I do that on the machine, of course. However, because it's a little head and because I'm popping some ears in there, I really want it to be really even. I want, when I go to sew it and put it under the machine, that it's not slipping and it's not moving. I've got my little ears tucked in there. They're nowhere near the seams. They're not going to get caught up. Only the top of them, which is what we want, so that they're incorporated. So you absolutely don't have to do this, but it is just something that I do, just as standard practice in all of my work. Areas like this, and definitely heads, I've just threaded up just my slim darning needle, and I've got my Gutermann top stitching thread, which is just a strong thread, and you can see I'm just using an overcasting stitch, and I will actually go around that whole head. And what that means is I can then take off those clips, I can remove my pins, and then I can pop that little head under the machine, and nothing will shift, nothing will move, and it will be in exactly the right place. I can take that tacking stitch out afterwards if I wish. There's probably no real reason to, although if I take the tacking stitch out, I can clip those curves again. So I'm going to work all the way around there, and then I'm going to sew that on the machine, sew that same seam on the machine 2 times, like we have right throughout the doll. That little head all sewn up now, and I took out my little tacking stitch so that I was able to use my pinking shears again just to clip those curves. So now through the neck opening, because we've got some little ears to hang on to, it's quite easy to turn that little head through, and you can check all of your stitching and your seams. Push that one out again using knitting needle or something like that. Again, make sure all of your seams are rolled out. You can see your little ears are sitting nicely. They're the same distance apart. Tiny bit of tacking stitch showing there, and which I'll just remove with my little quick unpick. And you can see that the ears are really securely in there. They're never going to come off, and it's a lot easier to put ears in evenly and perfectly like that than trying to sew them on afterwards. And of course, they're a lot stronger if they're sewn into the seam, so better for a child's toy for sure. So where we go from here is, normally I would just stuff that little head, because I do all of my adding my eyes and my nose and mouth embroidery after the head is filled. However, because I'm using safety eyes this time, I'm going to have to, this is the only drawback with using safety eyes, that I have to temporarily stuff the head to get my eye placement correct. So I have to quickly stuff the head. I won't pack it firm, I will just get the shape right, and then I will check my eye placement and make my little marks ready for my little safety eyes to be popped in, because of course they're clamped from behind, and so we still need access to get in there and put that little clamp on the back of them. If you were using glass eyes, as I did with this little one, then you'll find to go ahead, fill up that head, pack it firm, so that when we put the head on the body, you can then add the eyes afterwards. We do our little nose and mouth sewing afterwards anyway, so after the head is filled. So while it seems a little bit of a chore, and you might think, well, why didn't we add the eyes before when our pattern pieces were flat? Why didn't we just pop them in then? Because we can never really trust our sewing. Even if you put your eyes in the pieces, safety eyes don't come out. That's why they're so good. Once you've popped them in, if your sewing's just a little bit out on your center seam, you find that one eye's sitting higher than the other, and it will bother you, or it will bother me. And so it's very hard to get, it very even. So it's just better to do this. It takes a couple of minutes, but it's definitely worth it. So I'm going to just quickly throw some stuffing into that head, and so that we get the basic shape. So I have that little head just softly filled. You can see it's all still quite soft, but it's filled out enough for us to see exactly where those eyes will sit. All that will happen when I fill it properly is it will just be firmer packed, but the positioning will stay the same. So you can see I've actually got some little teddy bear eye pins here. They're just a little pin with a pretend eye on the end, which are really handy for checking your eye position. Of course, you can just use a normal ball-headed pin. That will do the same thing. And I like to measure from the center seam, check that I'm getting them the right width apart each side, and you'll find that these, they're sitting around about 3.5 centimeters from the top of the head there, but you put them where you like. Of course, changing the position of the eyes greatly changes the expression on the animal's face. Generally, if they are wider apart, they tend to look younger and more innocent. If you bring them closer together, of course, they look slightly older and perhaps a little meaner. So I like to keep them just quite neutral. It's like this little one here. Hers are probably set a little bit further apart, but because these are safety eyes, I'm hoping these will sink in a little more where they are. So once my eye position is chosen, I just simply make a little mark. I'm going to use my awl to just enlarge that little hole slightly, just so I can still see it. I don't want to lose it. And I'm going to make my mark quite clearly in that little hole. We will enlarge that hole when we go to put our eyes in. And you can see I'm clearly not going to lose that space. Same with the other one. Pop my awl in that little hole. And my little marker straight in the hole. Check my eye position again, and you can see that's quite even. I'm pretty happy with that. Them being slightly uneven isn't a big issue. That's going to happen. We are dealing with fabric after all, but we do our best, and measuring it like that, it just means we've given it our best shot. So now we can pull out this temporary stuffing. You can see there wasn't much in there at all. I can just pull it all straight out with my fingers. And now using safety eyes, it's just a matter of making those little holes slightly bigger. So I'm going to continue to just enlarge that hole with my eye. You can see that the shank of the little safety eyes is quite thick. So I'm going to use just the tips of my scissors, closed of course, and I'm going to just enlarge that little hole until it will easily accommodate that little shank, and perhaps the tip of my knitting needle, because you want it to slip in and you want it to be able to slip all the way down easily. You don't want it getting caught on the little ridges, because that just means the eye won't be placed well. You see that little hole is quite large. Pop that little eye in. We can reach into the back there. It's very, very important that you push all of that fabric right down to the base of the eye. Right down there. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. Normally we would just add the little clamp on the back and we'd be done. Pop the other one in and we'd be done. Because I want to try and give an illusion of a slightly deeper set eye, there's a way that we can do that, and that is by cutting a couple of little circles just of plain felt, just to sit on the back of the eye, and then we clamp onto that. If we do that, we get more cushioning around the eye. Basically, that's all it is. It's just a little trick, but I just find it's really useful, and it does make a fair difference to how far the eye sits out from the head. So once that eye is pushed in, I'm going to add one of my little discs. Make sure it's pushed right down. Then I'm going to add another one of my little discs. You could just use one. It's totally up to you. Now we have access to the back of the eye there. They're a little bit tricky. Hope you can see everything there. You can see that little shank is there. And I'm going to add my little clamp on the back. See with the safety eye, you've got your little clamp and it's a little domed. The little domed goes on top. And I find the best thing for clamping these down is a cotton reel that has the hole in the end. You can see that there, and we can just pop that over that little shank and you'll hear it crunch down. Make sure it's exactly over that. Pop that down and it will clip into its little grooves. Very important that it's pushed down well, because we don't ever want that little eye to come off. You can see that little eye now, you can see it's actually set in a little way. Because we've popped those little foam circles behind it, it's actually set in a little bit, which is exactly what we're after. So we make sure, nicely clipped. Just check it again. Like to rotate it around, make sure I've got it all clamped down on every side. Never want those little things to come out. So it's really that easy. Now I'm just going to do exactly the same with the other eye. So both those little eyes are in, and now our next job is just to fill the head. Now we're going to fill the head with our stuffing. I'm going to be using my little forceps, and I'm going to pack that little head very, very firm for the same reason. Sewing her little nose and mouth in and sewing her head to her body is much simpler when the head is packed nice and firm. So you can see that little head is stuffed and it's lovely and firm. That eye positioning has come up really well and they look nicely sunk, and I have used my little secret trick again with my felting needle and have been able to pack that stuffing right down into the muzzle area where I'm going to sew that little nose and mouth. It will make it very easy. You can see I've packed that very flat, nice and flat, and you can see how much room I've left there. This is so that we can attach the head to the body. I've trimmed this little front seam, so it's very tidy. It's part of the reason why I use felt for the heads of my animal dolls, because we can sew that little head straight onto the body, and it's because felt doesn't actually have a raw edge, it looks absolutely fine, and it certainly makes it easier. So it's simply a matter of setting our little head, checking for position. You might want to start with the front, and we take our pin straight through the front and perhaps straight through the back. Check your placement, and then it's a matter of matching up your side seams with your pins. We're going to pin that little head all the way around with a whole lot of pins. So here I'm just matching up that side seam. I hope you can see that there. Popping that one in, so I'm matching the side seam of the head with the side seam of the shoulder, and I will do the same on the other side. Oh, that's a bent pin, don't want that one. Another one straight in there, and then I'll just go around and I will actually pin every single space all the way around. And keep checking. You can pull it off and adjust it. Now we're going to be sewing this little head on, and we will see our stitches for sure. We will use a thread that will disguise it as much as possible, but with all of my little animal dolls, you'll find that the little clothing that I also share with you, there's always a little neck adornment. There is something. So there on this particular one, this is a little bunny, and she will be wearing a little neck ruffle. But if you make her again, once all of the videos are up, you'll see that there are little boys' clothes and little girls' clothes, and there will always be some kind of a neck adornment that will cover that little seam, as you can see with this little one here. Of course, we can't see any of that sewing, but you'd be surprised how neat it comes up. So once you're happy with that placement, which I'm happy with that placement there, I've threaded up my needle. I've got just a medium-sized darner. I'm using my favourite thread, which is Gutermann top stitching thread. I use it for absolutely everything, just in a colour that just matches all of those tones. And it's a single thread, but I've made it quite a long thread because I don't want to run out halfway through. And I'm going to start, I usually start somewhere at the back, and I'm going to take in, I've got a knot at the end of my thread, and I'm going to just dig into the body and come out. It's a bit tricky to show you. Move your little arms. Okay. And I'm going to come out right there. You can see there I'm coming out right there on the same kind of seam allowance that I've used right through the doll. So that little knot I can tuck in and hide under the head there, and all I'm going to do is work all the way around, taking little stitches, and we don't have to worry too much about being too close together at this stage. So I go around probably twice and sometimes 3 times, wherever I think it needs a little bit more. You can see that I'm just using a normal needle. Granted, it's a darner, so it's a little bit bigger. But because that head is stuffed nice and firm, and so is the neck area and the shoulder on the body, it's very easy. And it's very easy to get to. It's really not tricky, and you can just make your way around. Some techniques of adding heads and body parts can be really daunting, but I've found this to be really simple. And like I said, we're going to be covering that little neck section with some clothing, so we don't have to be too worried about that. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to make my way all the way around, and then I'm going to go around again and just checking it for little spots that I might have missed and neatening it up, and you'll see the little finished result. So you can see now that I've gone 2 times around that little neck. that little neckline there. Now you can see that the stitching is visible, but we're still being able to keep it nice and neat. Now the way that I finish that off, now that that's so very secure, I've gone right around, and just remember, going around is just diving into the body and coming out along that neckline all the way around a couple of times like I have there. Now to finish off, I'm going to dive back into that little neckline. I'm going to come out at the back just because it's a little more inconspicuous. Tug that one right down. I'm going to make a couple of little tiny stitches here in the back just to really secure those threads. So I'm just going to go 1 and 2, slip through that loop, make a little knot, and then I'm going to dive back into the body and really pull that knot in. So it's all quite invisible there. And we really do have a tidy little neckline. As I said, all of my little dolls, whether they're boys or girls, you're going to find that they all have some kind of little neck adornment that's going to cover that up. But I think you'll agree that that's a very clean and easy neck finish. So it's really just a whip stitch all the way around a couple of times. Also, now you'll understand why we use the interfacing on the felt, because that's what gives us the strength, and that means that that head is very, very well attached to that body. So the next thing we do is we're going to do just our final little nose and mouth. So now we're ready to sew our little nose and mouth in, as we have on this little bunny here. Now the measurement is approximately, it's around about 6 centimetres from that top seam to here, and that is where the crossover of those little nose and mouth marks, right, that cross area. So that's where I put a pin. Put a pin just there, and then I just take 2 little measurements across. Across is almost 1 centimetre each side. Make sure that they're even. And then below is just over 1 centimetre, because I like the mouth to be just a little bit wider than the top of the little nose. And we've threaded up, I've threaded up I've got a medium-sized doll's needle, and I'm actually using pearl thread, and I'm using it doubled, and I'm using brown. I just prefer brown on the bunnies. It's just not so harsh as the eyes, and that way the eyes really stand out. And I have double threaded it onto my needle, but I have threaded the 2 ends through the eye of the needle, so that if I make a mistake while I'm sewing, I can actually get my needle out of it, pull it out, rethread, and start again. If you actually do it with 1 loop through and not the end, you're sort of stuck. So sometimes we need to make little adjustments, and it's easier to do that. So there's our little marks there popped in. Start at the back of the head. I like to dive in at the back of the head here, and I'm going to come out exactly on one, and it must be exactly on one of my little spots, and it can take a little bit of juggling with your doll needle, but it's easier than you might think to hit the spot, and there it is. Pull that one all the way through. In the back here, we can actually pull that little knot out a little bit. Take our awl, and we're just going to make that little hole. Because it's felt, we can open up those fibres, and we can pull that little knot into the head where it will be lost in the back of the head there, and we can tidy up those fibres to cover that. So here we are. Our little thread is being held at the back by the knot, and then we're just going to cross over. Make sure that your little threads aren't crossing over if you're using 2. So my first stitch goes across, and you can see that it's crossing over exactly in that spot. We're going to come out, we're going to pop our needle in here, and we're going to come out straight across to the other corner of the mouth. Again, it might take a little bit of juggling, but you will find the sweet spot. Make sure it's right on that spot. Pull those threads through. Make sure that you place them as you're pulling it through, making sure that they're not twisted. Pull them all the way through. I need to pull that one up again. Important that there's no twisting in the threads. There we go. That's nice and straight. And then we're going to do the same thing, check that our threads aren't twisted, and our last stitch is going to dive straight back into that side, and then we're going to come out at the back of the head. Anywhere just at the back where it won't be very visible. Check our threads again. Make sure they're going in not twisted. Pull that through. Pull out our little pin. Check your placements. Check that it's all nice and even. And in the back here you'll see we'll be able to just dive back in. I tend to go through the body a couple of times, just jumping back into the same entry hole. Just to really secure those threads a couple of times. Back and forth a little. And I like to come out right on that edge again. Where I'm going to do the same thing, I'm just going to take a tiny little bit of a stitch. I'm going to bring my needle through the loop, make a little knot, dive back into the body, just exit out anywhere along the body there, and we really can hide those little knots and thread ends at the back there, and just snip off at the front, give it a little tug, and snip, and those ends pop back in. And there you have a lovely little tidy nose and mouth. So that is our little bunny, and she's all ready for her clothes. Now her clothes are on the next video. They're on a separate video. I just didn't want this video to be too long for you. So there she is. She's all naked and she's all ready. She's going to have a little neck ruffle that's going to be made up, and it's going to be made up in this fabric, and her little skirt is going to be made up in this fabric too. And then we're going to make her a little pendant. So that's in the next video, and that's up and ready for you now. If you're feeling energetic, you can jump straight into that one and get this little bunny finished. Well, thank you for joining me today and making this lovely little bunny. Now, if you're feeling energetic and you want to jump straight into making her little outfit, if you stay with me all the way to the end of the video, this video will link up with the next one, and I'll show you how to make her little outfit. Make sure that you subscribe because the next one's coming up. As I said, this is a series and I'm very excited about it. So I'm trying to think of all of the little animals that are coming up. So there's going to be a puppy, there's going to be a little fox, there's going to be a panda bear, there's going to be a teddy bear, and I'm sure I'll come up with a whole lot more. And there will be boys and girls and so many little bits of clothing to choose from. I really do hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, perhaps you give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. In the meantime, make sure that if something good comes your way, or if you've enjoyed this video, just remember to pay it forward, because you know what? Everybody can. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.